Plunderstorm might have just changed WoW content forever. I've been saying Plunderstorm could be used as a testing ground for abilities. Plunderstorm could be used for a lot of things because it's really like its own little bubble where Blizzard can test things, do crazy things, and not worry about how it's going to affect 300 different specs and rating and everything else. It's just a fun little game mode. So let's see what Bellular has to say about how Plunderstorm could change WoW content forever.
Dark Soul 9669 says, I really hope they experiment with abilities for retail with this. Very fun experiment and can be beyond what CC is even for FFIMO. Now, you might look at that and think, wait, what? Okay, so the context is we're talking about the abilities in Plunderstorm. Now, the Plunderstorm abilities are not traditional World of Warcraft abilities. So in WoW, I walk up to Matt, I say, hello, Matt, and I right-click on him, and then I just start, my arm just starts moving by itself, attacking him. I'm like, wow, it's an auto attack. Yeah. Sorry, Matt. This is just a joke.
I have high armor, it's fine.
There shan't be violence.
Sad.
In Plunderstorm, though, whenever you click the button, your character goes, yeah, and then anything in front of your character gets hit.
It's not a tab
is far
target.
Closer, actually, to how a lot of the core combat in Guild Wars 2 works, which is fairly interesting.
Really?
Now, I actually think that this solves why Torghast blew. That's too big of a statement. It solves part of why Torghast blew. So one of the problems with Torghast that we were discussing is there was so much what we call white damage, which is, auto attack damage from enemies, where, imagine playing Binding of Isaac or any roguelite, but there is unavoidable damage that will kill you.
He actually makes a good point. One thing I do like a lot about Plunderstorm is all of the NPCs that attack you, they all have like frontal cone abilities or AoE abilities that are... I have no friends. That was unnecessary, but actually very funny. I appreciate that. And I do have friends, okay? They're just not IRL friends. They're all in my head. Thank you very much for that. As I was saying, the main thing that I enjoy about the NPCs is everything's dodgeable. Everything's avoidable. You could do whatever you got to do to make sure that there's skill involved, I should say. There is skill involved, and the more skilled you are with your ability to move around and dodge things, the better your outcome will be against NPCs. Whereas in Torghast, like he's saying, there was just unavoidable damage. You target something, and it's going to hit you no matter what. So that was a very nice thing about Plunderstorm. I'm not saying they should do that throughout all of WoW, but definitely in things like Torghast, it's a great idea.
That meant that the way you had to play Torghast was... either, slow careful or basically just be an absolute CC god. So if you had massive Mythic Plus,
still laughing about that
burn them down, CC everything, if you were good at that, then, thumbs up. But for everybody else, it wasn't. And that unavoidable white damage basically just meant that you were kind of always, just limited their design space so much. Because again, imagine Binding of Isaac or any of those games, but where you have unavoidable damage. So if Torghast actually started off being mostly classless, just you and an auto attack, but you actually pick up new abilities and pick up things, and your enemies have attacks you can dodge. So one of the things that I think is actually fun and feels fresh in Plunderstorm is actually
You know what I'm thinking? Bellular might have just figured out what the time-running Pandamonium thing is. Because Blizzard's been hinting, I don't know if you guys have seen it, Blizzard's been hinting it through tweets that a new PvE event is coming, and they've been dropping the Panda emote and talking about Plunderstorm in those same tweets. And he might be onto something. We might be getting a Torghast-esque with a Plunderstorm mechanics run-through event where you get items for completing it in a certain amount of time. Some kind of time-running Pandamonium. He might have just figured out what it is.
Killing a mob in World of Warcraft, as if I'm not playing a tab-targeting MMORPG. That feels really fresh. Like, there I am in the Arathi Basin. Just, oh my god, when you're in the circle of...
By the way, what I'm talking about is coming in 10.2.7.
Elements. Yeah. And you're like, oh, gotta dodge his stuff. But, I'm not just dodging his stuff and then just spamming some filler button or auto-attacking. I'm dodging the opponent's moves, dodging the balls, trying not to get killed. You're fighting some of those wee necromancer fellas. They do their big, triangle thing.
Triangle.
Highlands, yes. And, you dodge that. That actually, that is a level of engagement with the world you don't normally feel. And do you know what the last time I felt that was? In a way, with WoW? It was being undergeared on the Timeless Isle.
because the Timeless Isle was peak World of Warcraft, and they'll
Peak.
never get it back.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've actually heard some people.
Timeless
I was
Isle.
talking to a
Timeless Isle
Remax
was
developer,
fun.
and they were
It was. It was a great time in WoW. Definitely, he's right. It is much more engaging to fight NPCs in the Plunderstorm event than it is in current WoW. And that's because of the amount of, tacticalness it takes, right? Like, you watch their abilities, you watch their cast times, you understand they have frontal cone abilities, you got to be behind them sometimes, dodge, get out of a zone at points. They're almost like mini boss fights. Like, the only time you actually see targetable, frontal and all these kinds of abilities is during a boss fight in a raid. And all these NPCs are essentially like mini bosses. So it does make it more engaging and more fun.
We're talking about actually a whole bunch of Dark Souls
active
inspirations
gameplay,
being
yeah.
directly used by the team when making some Timeless Isle enemies
That
and
was obvious as
when making the rares.
Frogs that instantly kill you? Yeah. Yeah, someone was in Blight. Someone fell into the sewers in Blighttown, had a bad day, and then thought everyone else must suffer.
Yeah, but like even just the way the attack, just everything about how those NPCs felt, and also the rare mobs. There was one time I had no gear, I was leveling, and I'm like, oh my god, some of these rare mobs are asking me to play. And I even remember, hunting down the spirit hunter guys. Or what am I talking about? The spirit pets.
Aye.
And those were actually set up as little challenges too. So that was really strong. And I think that something like this is exactly what WoW could just benefit from so much. So I would almost say, like, imagine if you could just retool Torghast and call it, the testament to our grand failure. It's probably not what you should call a game mode, but whatever. But imagine a Torghast reworked.
Yeah.
And it plays like Plunderstorm. That would be different.
I'm telling you, I don't think he realizes that's what time running Pandemonium is going to be. That's what it's going to be. 100%. I'm convinced at this point.
Imagine, any sort of combat thing in World of Warcraft, but it's playing like Plunderstorm. I actually think that would have... That would blow
A monument to our
open
suffering.
the approachability of World of Warcraft, because that's the thing with Plunderstorm. It's so approachable from using its abilities. Like, you can throw anyone into Plunderstorm, give them those abilities, and they can click on a few of them, and, within 30 minutes of messing around, they'll know. And maybe within 3 hours, they'll actually feel like they really have a command of them.
100%. He's right. If they ever made Plunderstorm free to play, if it became free to play and you had like Ninja and all these other, typical Battle Royale players play it, they would figure it out pretty quickly. Even though they've never played WoW even a day in their life, I think the abilities are pretty intuitive. They would just use them once and be like, oh, okay, that's what this does. And within an hour, they would have mastered the game. It's very much approachable.
Whereas
WoW would take current WoW would take a lot more time. That's for sure.
You look at, say, a Ninja guide for your opener
I didn't watch
in
this video
FF14,
before, but
or you look at a more complex character or complex class. I think one of the weaknesses of some of the Druid stuff, especially with Feral over a long time, is like I feel like Feral applies to a very broad audience, maybe quite a few of the more collector style players. I don't know why, it's just in my head it makes sense.
Because CAD form run fast.
Yeah, but
And
like I don't know,
form,
just
fly
aesthetically.
fast, yeah.
But it's that idea of like you have this, play a Feral Druid, and it ends up being one of the most complex, hard to play, things in the game. And for a lot of the people who would be interested in it, they're just not anymore. But imagine a Feral that is built out of a small number of abilities, a small number of slots, that is nailing the fantasy of that. And this is where I'm going to get to. Hey, you've ticked Mop off your thing. You can tick Final Fantasy off your bingo again. And this, I think, was a brave step that actually gave me... whenever I saw it, I was like, oh my god, that is one big ball move. Whenever they did the new PvP mode in...
Crystalline Conflict.
So, at the time I was playing Red Mage, which is kind of like you're doing, mage-ish things, but you've got a rapier. You jump in, you go, whah, and then you jump back, and then you'll go boom.
It actually sounds pretty
There,
cool.
that's your animation reference.
Combo buttons,
yeah. But what they did in Crystalline Conflict is they turned the whole experience of playing a Red Mage into 4 buttons?
something like that. I can't remember exactly.
It was crazy. So you went from a full
a Demon Hunter?
thing that you played into this like simple, approachable, high-paced version of it, and it felt amazing. And that's actually what they've been able to do here. So think about the fantasy of playing a warlock in WoW, maybe a Destro warlock, and imagine if that was being achieved with, you know, abilities in the style of Plunderstorm. You know, you actually could be getting onto something.
Yeah.
You know, imagine a Vampire Survivors inspired mode. And we'll talk about that soon.
There is an issue in current WoW, and he's kind of hinting at it, of ability bloat, right? There are some classes that have become extremely complicated. My worry was that hero talents were going to do a lot of the same or exacerbate that issue. The truth is, really, hero talents only give you 2 abilities. The rest are just seemingly, you know, very passive percentage upgrades on things. But ability bloat is definitely a thing, and I think one reason why Plunderstorm feels very refreshing, whether you PvP or just treat it as a PvE, go around and kill NPCs, is that it's extremely simple. It's just a couple buttons. You're clicking them, you're going through, this is off cooldown, click this next, grab this guy, do this thing. It's very straightforward and simple. Ability bloat is a problem. You should play Brewmaster Monk, Sam. I'm sure, look, that's a thing, though. That's another problem, right? Is there are some classes... You got some classes out there that are 3 buttons, and you got some classes out there that are hyper complicated rotation, right? And that's an issue. Shouldn't be that way, especially when that 3-button class is leading in DPS and is currently parsing out higher than everything else. That doesn't seem very fair. So there should be a balance. Brewmaster should be brought down, right? And the 3-button classes, maybe a Demon Hunter or something, should be brought up in complication. There should be a balance. There shouldn't be classes that are that much more complicated than others, and you shouldn't be rewarded for playing a dumbed-down class because it's parsing out the highest. And there's some issues there. There's some issues.
Probably too. Yeah.
Rat Pally.
I just think the combat is really fantastic. I think that it's got a great future outside of Plunderstorm.
I have high levels of doubt that it would apply in a way that feels like a completely perfect and polished GIM.
It's a bit of a high bar there, dude.
Because it's really sort of jank in a way. They could maybe get away with that.
I don't think it's jank.
If they, like, maybe it's mostly animations and telegraphs and stuff. Maybe if there was a little bit more, like, clear stuff, like the kind of Wildstar telegraphs in a way or something. Not quite as heavy as that, but just because like the ranges and a lot of abilities aren't super clear, which is like a WoW problem in general. And there's like stuff.
Do they cast
like,
and release?
What?
Do they cast and release? I think they do cast and release, not key down. So maybe, you know, you display like a little highlight of its arc or whatever.
You need a
when you hold down.
You need a league like telegraph shot that you can see.
Or maybe you know when you do a sword swing and there's like the effect of the trail of your sword.
Yeah, it needs to be like
just
clear,
make the movement trail bigger.
Yeah, and these are like clear outlines where it hits, stuff like that.
Total War arrows after I think Rome too.
Well, they're right.
Yeah, because
it's not clear to me sometimes if I'm close enough to the NPC that whether or not I'm hitting it or not. Right, I can't tell how big my hitbox is at times, and I'll notice sometimes, his health's not dropping. I'm not close enough. I'm standing there hitting the air. So yeah, it would be nice if it was more clear.
Like, it's fine, but also you can pull 20 mobs.
I've done it, Ash. I've done it.
Circle strafe and kill them all without taking any damage. So there's clearly like a little bit of stuff like that which would need to be worked out if you wanted to make it something into more like a more compelling game mode, because obviously the PvE is very light and the PvP is where it actually does kick in. So them getting a decent PvE experience out of that I would like to say it would take a lot more work than what they already have done.
So
if you understand what I mean.
Imagine the Evoker. Like
no, I'd rather not, thanks.
Right now, look, I just don't enjoy the Evoker playstyle. You know, I just don't enjoy that much.
Are there evokers in chat that do enjoy
abilities, like, you know, the big deep breath. That's awesome. But like, you can imagine a version of Evoker, like say a Destro Evoker, that's more in the design sort of scheme of this, that way more feels like what that feels like, because it's not going to be, you know, extruded through this is a World of Warcraft dungeon and raid spec that everything has got to go through in main WoW.
Yeah.
And I guess, the reason why I brought up...
the problem with it, he's totally right, is, a lot of things have to go through that filter of how does this apply to competitive raiding, which is the biggest problem WoW has, is the competitive raid scene has really fucked up a lot of things. I'll be completely honest. It has, because everything needs to go through that filter. Every class they make, every ability they put in, every spec they do has to go through, well, how does this affect competitive rating? Because if it breaks competitive rating, we need to change it. Because if it breaks it, then obviously all these race to world first guilds are just going to use the broken method, and they can't have that. Then how does it apply to PvP and then Mythic Plus? Yep, that too, right? They got to balance all that out. There's so much balancing that goes on that it's like a fun filter, right? If something is fun, but then it hits the wall of, well, it's going to break Mythic rating, it's going to break PvP, it's going to break Mythic Plus, yeah, then you got to change it. So that's why Plunderstorm has some really fun abilities that could just never be seen in current WoW, because it would break some of these endgame systems. Where if they were not really competitive, and the main thing is, I think it's the competitive part of it, the raid scene basically turning WoW into an esport, that's where the problems arise. Because if it's slightly broken, just tiny bit, it's okay. But even the tiniest bit of breakage is not okay when you're talking about a competitive raid scene. That's the main problem. I wish that shit didn't exist, to be honest.
Whenever you do Crystalline Conflict, you do it on your own character. And, the game's just like, yo, dude, I just took your abilities away. Go do that. So imagine if you could queue up for Plunderstorm with your own character. And it works more like the Crystalline Conflict, where it's still your character, but you have different abilities, and, there's some different mechanics there. I think that's maybe one thing that they could do.
Yeah, because you could...
Because the design space, again, if you went into Torghast, because, you're like, well, how could you do that in World of Warcraft, Michael? Torghast would never work. Crystalline Conflict. Imagine if instead with Torghast, they were like, hey, this is overtly what it is. Some new abilities based on your class, go.
Yeah, because you could easily imagine.
Yeah, it would be fun.
Okay, well, you're playing a warrior, right? Well, what have you got? You've got Quaking Leap, you've got Searing Axe, you've got Hunter's Chain. There you go. Look at that. Obviously, that's only 3 abilities, so maybe you give them Lightning Bulwark as well or something like that, and you go, oh, look at that, you've got a warrior toolkit. Now, obviously, is that well balanced? Who gives a shit? But the kind of the thought process is actually there. You could just go, oh yeah, here's what a warrior would play like. If you wanted to pick the warrior loadout, obviously that doesn't work well with the RNG elements and the spell break stuff and the build craft of Plunderstorm. But you could easily see how that would actually work fairly well.
Yeah, outside of Plunderstorm, it could work.
A couple of different slots you swap out based on your warrior. So do you want Hunter's Chain, Steel Traps, Caltrops, Leap?
I think at a PvE event it would work really well.
Those you want the Toxic Mackerel instead of Searing Axe, stuff like that you could kind of build around. So I think that's exactly one of the reasons I think people are kind of excited enough about it. Because you go, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
You can see them go, oh, we cooked. We now have a new thing in our toolkit that we can use. What if we use this for a mini game in the War Within?
Oh.
A later patch? What if the next time the Brawler...
What if we use it in 10.2.7? I'm telling you, these tweets have been coming out. I've been seeing them everywhere where they're relating Plunderstorm to a PvE event, and they're using the Panda emote. They're relating it directly to time-running Pandamonium. I'm telling you, it's going to come sooner than they think. They're cooking on it, thinking they're talking about an expansion from now, but they're not. They're talking about the patch that's coming up next.
Guild shows up, you play it like this. Oh! And now you suddenly see you've got a different...
Bellular just freaking blow a nut.
And now you suddenly see you've got a different mini game in the War Within.
Oh.
A later patch. What if the next time the Brawlers Guild shows up, you play it like this? Oh. And now you suddenly see you've got a different...
It's nerdgasm.
It's a different game, right? It's a completely different game. And some people might be like, I don't like this game as much as the other game. But it is the difference between CC. You can just play the...
And just actually, I think this would allow them to sell fantasies better. Because you see the Evoker, right? Look, I get it. We want Komodo Dragon, not Gecko. I get it. I also thought Komodo dragons were the coolest creature on Earth when I was a kid, and I still think they're very high in the tier list. Though I'm wild partial to beavers and otters. Aquatic mammals, they're my jam. I need to play that.
Beavers and otters. Komodo dragons are definitely S tier above those. I don't know what he's talking about.
City builder about beavers, but anyway.
They're like living
imagine
dinosaurs.
Imagine the Drakthir Evoker. And again, not for regular WoW, but in a mode like this. Imagine if, you were selecting your basic loadout or whatever for, a Plunderstorm PvE. And imagine if your Drakthir, it had the deep breath and made it go wee. And it had its wing buffet and it had its tail swipe. And maybe it had just, the claws. And maybe it moved a little bit faster. But maybe it actually got impacted by knockbacks harder. It actually flew back further. When you know, like the difference between, say, Bowser and Yoshi when you're playing Mario Kart. Like, they are able to sell a fantasy better. So imagine, like, that's a Drakthir that feels really, cool.
Right, you bump into Yoshi with Bowser. Yeah, he's gonna knock him back further. It's just a weight and strength thing.
Be super fun. But then you could maybe have your big normal WoW Draconid that's like a turbo dragon warrior. And they could both be there and both feel cool. Because World of Warcraft kind of struggled with the Drakthir to fully sell the fantasy of being a Drakthir.
Yeah, because they worried about balancing it,
to be a normal WoW thing. And if the Drakthir just runs faster and blah, 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 that is totally Imba.
Right.
Remember we used to say Imba.
Sadly.
I mean, they even freaking nerfed the dragon, the dragon, what's it called? Their flight thing, right? Their racial ability. They nerfed it because they were like, oh, that's not really fair. They're going to be flying around too easily. It's ridiculous because they wanted to keep it within the bubble of the WoW, with the WoW bubble and keep everything balanced perfectly and all that. Now they've kind of redecked that and taken it back and given them the ability to fly like a normal dragon race should. But yeah, a lot of that stuff, he's totally right. There's the issue of always balancing things out perfectly for the game, so everything works out nicely. And it's usually still broken in the end. It's the fun police.
Used to mean imbalanced or also inbound, I suppose.
No,
Did it mean inbound?
no, IMBA, IMBA. How could that possibly be inbound? Just INBO.
Because not only, Matt, am I dyslexic, I am also fucking stupid.
What a way
Finally,
to
we
end
agree on something.
What a way to end it, yeah. No, they're totally right. And I honestly, my main takeaway from this whole video is that I think they're very much on to whatever this time-running Pandemonium event is going to be. I really think they're right. I think it's going to be this combination of Torghast running something quickly, maybe some kind of cool timed event where you gather a bunch of abilities, do a bunch of cool stuff, a bunch of nice frontal attack, action combat like we see in Plunderstorm, but in a PvE sense, and you get cool rewards at the end. I think they got it and they don't even know it yet, but that could be what it is.